Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear participants of the webinar. Today we have the second session, and I hope you can hear me well. We have two channels for communication, English channel and Russian channel. Instructions are given how to switch between the two. You have the button at the bottom on the right side, interpretation. So you can choose either English Russian channel, or you can turn them off if you are bilingual. In the first webinar, we had an interesting PowerPoint presentation from the team of consultants. The consultants, let me remind their names. We have Ignacy Ragas, he is the team leader for the consulting team. Adrian Summons, our ports and shipping consultant with a huge international experience. And we have Davran Khajayev, who is from Tashkent, and he knows very well how Central Asian governments operate. He is the institutional consultant for the project. Today we will discuss the findings of the study. There were some questions in the previous session, which we can also discuss. And recommendations which will be given by the consulting team. We will have some time allocated for the countries to respond to those recommendations and maybe suggest something else. So we will try to make this session as less formal as possible. Let me probably return to some of the questions which have been tabled by some of the participants in the previous webinar. We had some questions about the CAREC program in general, the alternative corridors, the purpose of the CAREC corridors. So responding to this, I shall mention that the CAREC program is a joint program among the governments of 11 countries, and the unlimited number of developing partners. Unlimited because since 2017, this is an open platform where countries are represented, and whatever development partner is willing to join are always welcome. That's why we have 6 initial founding members of the development partner community: Asian Development Bank, EBRD, Islamic Development Bank, World Bank, UNDP program, and IMF. But now we have many more respectful development partners. We have CAREC transport corridors, and we shall say that the CAREC transport corridors in many cases coincide with other transport corridors like Eurasian transport corridors, European transport corridors, Asian transport corridors, black and road transport corridors, and eco transport corridors, etc. Why do we need to have CAREC corridors? Firstly, this is a very useful tool, as it appears to be, because basically through the CAREC corridors, it's possible to align certain investments of the member countries. Second, while we have so many intergovernmental or bilateral partnership platforms, the CAREC is quite unique in terms of that we have member countries, but we also have developing partners. If you take Asian Development Bank, this is the bank with the shareholders from 68 countries, such as the practically all European Union countries, Japan, United States, Canada, and many, many others. So when it comes to the principles of the CAREC program, the CAREC program is based on principles which are shared among the developing countries and developed countries who contributed to establishment of these international financial institutions. It's very important that any project which we deem to be considered as the CAREC project shall be based on transparent practices. The project is supposed to have solid economic value. Procurement of any works is done following specific procedures, the procedures of the financial institution, international financial institutions. We also have strict safeguards and environment protocols. So when it comes to the unlocking potential of these transport corridors, of course, we have to take into account the political will of the countries who are the members of the CAREC program. We have some security issues in some of the countries, but it's difficult to say that we have political unwillingness in any of the countries to provide sufficient transit opportunities for other neighbors. But when we talk about the political will, one side is that you have to be open to the cooperation with other countries. The other is you need to have the capacity to manage your own institutions, to provide sufficiently good transit capacity and regime for other countries. And here, of course, it's much more difficult to achieve than to declare, because it's important to control
Good morning to everybody. Unfortunately, it seems that the internet connection of Oleg has disappeared. So I suggest that while he tries to connect back, we can start with the first presentation of about the actions and recommended actions from our study, and maybe he will continue his introduction after solving his technical problems. So if you don't mind, I would start my presentation, and well, it seems that Oleg tries to be back. Anyway, I'm starting. It will not take more than 15 minutes, so hopefully we will have Oleg back by then. So I'm trying to share with you my presentation. Does it work? Okay, thank you. So again, thank you for welcome to this second Ports and Logistics webinar. This second webinar will be focused on next steps. We focus our first webinar on main findings and conclusions. Today, it's the time to present how to move forward in this field of action. So, good. So it is worth to remind that that the proposed actions we are going to present to you are meant not to duplicate already ongoing work under the 5 strategic pillars of CAREC transport strategy to 2030. So what we are going to introduce to you, to present to you, are basically complementary lines of actions, also trying to exploit synergies with work by other working groups, CAREC working groups, in particular, cross-border transport and trade facilitation and railways working groups. Let's recall the recommendations for planning and policies in ports and logistics that we presented during our first webinar. You may remember that we structured them in 4 pillars. One pillar, institutional. You have the main ideas, the main concepts here. Second pillar, infrastructure. Also, the main ideas regarding these pillars are mentioned here. Our third pillar was operations. And fourth pillar, capabilities and skills. So actions for moving forward stem from these recommendations, and I insist again that they are formulated so as not to duplicate actions, initiatives, and other work that is already being carried out by other CAREC working groups. So first, let's start with our first proposed action, which is to increase cooperation with other regional organizations that involve non-CAREC countries. The rationale is to increase visibility, coordination, and exchanges regarding transport corridors that involve countries such as Turkey, Iran, or Russia that are very relevant for CAREC countries' overseas trade. We are not meaning that coordination does not exist. As Oleg already mentioned, there are CAREC is built by a web of different partners, development member partners, but also development partners, other organizations. That means that some of these regional organizations and stakeholders have already been active in CAREC's discussions, in CAREC meetings. But we think that it might be worth to look for ways to increase this coordination by new frameworks or simply by ad hoc arrangements. Some possible outcomes from this coordination could be regular forums for the exchange of factual information about corridors and projected developments. Some corridor development initiatives, some of them have been already explored by other partners. You have some examples mentioned in these pictures. Or provide platforms for public and private sector exchanges to discuss on opportunities and bottlenecks. As have been mentioned by Oleg before, we are aware that regional cooperation organizations may reflect sometimes some conflicting interests. This was an issue that had been raised in our previous webinar. However, we still think that since much of CAREC landlocked countries' foreign trade relies on transport routes across Turkey, across Iran, across Russia, also across European Union, also involving other partners, other countries, in transshipment ports in India, in Sri Lanka, etc. It would be useful to increase exchange of information with other countries beyond the CAREC perimeter. Our second proposed line of action is to develop knowledge-sharing products on international best practice in ports, multimodal transport, logistics. As we mentioned in our first webinar, we found that often planners, officials, policymakers may be not familiar enough with how real-life logistics operates, priorities by private partners, etc. So the result may be sometimes a mismatch between government plans and projects and operational needs by private sector companies. Sometimes maybe logistics projects that have been proposed, but unfortunately not receiving much attention from private sector. Sometimes maybe infrastructure capacity is built in non-optimal locations for different reasons. So we think that some knowledge gap exists here. It is worth to remind that CAREC has produced so far very useful handbooks and guides on high-speed rail, toll roads, road asset management, road safety, green energy, etc. So we think there is room for handbooks, webinars, other knowledge sharing products on logistics infrastructures, ports, logistics centers, multimodal transport nodes, inland container terminals, dry ports, etc., that could fill what we perceive as a knowledge gap. Knowledge products exist. You can search them on the Google. However, they may not be adapted to the specificities of CAREC countries, so that the government officials can increase their knowledge and can engage in better informed decisions, negotiations with other partners, etc. Also, other issues that can be imagined here, also green ports initiatives. We can also think about knowledge sharing coupled with institutional and capacity building at ports or other infrastructure management agencies. Our third proposal is to explore opportunities for further development of multimodal corridors. As we explained in the first webinar, containerized transport is well developed in corridors to and from Chinese ports, but much less developed on corridors to and from the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, the Baltic, or the Indian Ocean and Arabian Sea ports. Additionally, we consider that rail shuttles could be explored among some corridors that feature denser traffic. In this sense, we would suggest to complement work already being done within other CAREC working groups, such as railways, so as to analyze opportunities and barriers to increase multimodal, or sometimes it's called as combined transport within this region. In addition to container rail transport, other technologies that are already appearing elsewhere as piggyback, rolling highways, intermodal transport units, etc., could also be explored and could perhaps contribute to reduce tracks on some congested corridors. Related to them, we can imagine that we could develop market studies for particular corridors, for feasibility assessments, roadmaps for implementation, etc. Our proposed set of actions looks at widening the scope of Cpmm so that full visibility of transport change to and from ports is included. You can remember we discussed at our previous webinar that so far Cpmm is doing a very good job monitoring costs, times involved in moving cargoes across CAREC corridors. Unfortunately, we don't have visibility of what happens beyond the perimeter of CAREC countries. So we don't really know how much time, what's the cost from moving containers cargoes from ports in the Baltic into Central Asia, or from ports in Turkey, ports in Iran, ports in Russia, or ports elsewhere in the Black Sea, etc. So we think there is room to add information here. So our suggestion would be to complement Cpmm with samples of multimodal transport change from dockside to destination and monitor them regularly. That could also provide the possibility to benchmark this transport change against other corridors, or maybe also against some competing routes. This exists in other parts of the world. Just to give you an example I'm familiar with, this exists in the East African community. Cargoes from ports in Kenya and Tanzania that start from Kenya and Tanzania ports are monitored on their route everywhere in this part of the world, in Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, or South Sudan. We know every year how much time a container stays in ports. Because of what? If it is because of problems at loading and unloading of ships, or at customs, or at port gates, or along the transport routes on road on rail. Another possibility is to, well, you can find this information, for example, this example on the East African community from this link. Another approach we could envisage is to chart cargo flows that could provide visibility of volumes moved in, out, and within, using what routes, what transport modes, what hubs. Unfortunately, this visibility does not exist now, though we know the Rail Working Group is working on a model for rail cargoes, but just rail cargoes. That would require, obviously, open exchange of data on trade and transport flows among all countries. That's obvious. Also, to give you another example that I'm familiar with, this logistics map exists in other regions of the world. For instance, in Latin America, both at regional and national level. You have this information here, unfortunately, only in Spanish, but anyway, you can have an idea of how it works. Our fifth set of actions is to widen the scope of CAREC private sector leg. Currently, the conduit for private sector participation in CAREC program is through the Federation of Carrier and Forwarder Associations. That mostly includes road haulage companies and freight forwarders. We suggest to open private sector engagement to stakeholders engaged in integral logistics and supply chain. During our visits and meetings, shortage of qualified human resources was mentioned by many private stakeholders as a limiting factor. This is confirmed by World Bank's LPI, as mentioned during our first webinar. Engaging a wider range of stakeholders, we think would broaden CAREC's logistics and transport discussions and agenda to include other aspects as, for instance, availability of logistics and warehousing facilities, issues as professional standards, maturity of business ecosystems, capacity and skills, etc. As outcomes, we think that well, we could start from already existing business organizations that are already emerging in some CAREC countries. Some some of these in Uzbekistan, other are emerging in Kazakhstan as well, and some other with a limited but ambitious ambition to get some regional level. Some of them are knitting a web of partnership with other counterparts in both in CAREC and non-CAREC countries. We think it would be useful to identify these organizations, to start some kind of contacts with them, engage them in discussions at CAREC, and offer platform for exchanges, workshops workshops in cooperation with other national logistics organizations or international logistics organizations that exist in other parts of the world, the European Logistics Organization, the Supply Chain Council, etc. And also, we could imagine that CAREC could encourage or support studies to assess skills gaps in logistics and how training systems could contribute to overcome these issues. Our sixth and final line of actions, we suggest that we could dive deeper and provide more detailed assessment on some particular corridors, some particular ports, or even some particular countries that could bring more visibility of issues, gaps, bottlenecks that currently remain sometimes undetected except for insiders. Unfortunately, the scoping nature of this first report on ports and logistics prevented us to dive further in some interesting directions. Let's take the middle corridor to Black Sea and Mediterranean, which was both quite overwhelmingly at our first webinar as the one with the higher opportunities for improvement. Our team identified some issues happening along this corridor that merit further investigation. For instance, the economies of shipping across the Caspian due to caps on vessel size, what we perceive as a reluctancy to move shipping containers on the Trans-Caucasus land route, or some issues regarding vessel schedules and reliability. Or take port connectivity issues. Sometimes these port connectivity issues are happening at the very first mile due to congestion, to urban encroachment. It happens in Karachi, it happens in Batumi, urban encroachment. It happens in Poti, that the last mile to get rail to the dockside is missing. These issues may be limiting factors to some other ambitious development schemes, some corridors that may even stretch across various countries. Some of them were suggested or were mentioned at our first webinar. We also think that transport and infrastructure planning in some landlocked countries could benefit from obtaining a clearer picture on transport chains to and from seaports in other third countries, as well about shipping connectivity in these ports, also about the cost time in competing corridors, etc. Some of these issues could be addressed in this. Some of the issues that could be addressed in this report is capacity, present and anticipated bottlenecks, impacts of planned developments, cost times along the complete transport chains in our corridors, in competing corridors, governance, planning issues, opportunities for PPPs, opportunities to improve port accessibility, port city issues, also shipping connectivity to ports. Well, this is our proposed menu of actions for further work. We would like to discuss and to have your views on them. I would like now to give the floor to my colleague Adrian, who might add also some ideas, and also he will reply some of the pending, some of the questions that were raised during our first webinar that could not be answered because of we ran out of time. So thanks for your attention, and please, Adrian, if you want to add something and answer these questions.
Thank you, Ignacy, and it's a good opportunity to again meet with the stakeholders and address some of the issues and the findings that from our scoping studies. Just, I think, repeating or emphasizing some of the observations from Ignacy as the team leader of the study. Again, this scoping study started to unwrap or decipher some of the observations and examinations that we undertook. Indeed, the region, if we focus in on the specific CAREC countries that are bordering the directly with the corridors and taking advantage of those, from the port's perspective, it's undertaking a transformation with the renewal of ports. Some of the seaport infrastructure has recently been relocated from city and urban environments as a result of the urban encroachment and the bottlenecks and congestion that was occurring in and around those ports. The renewal of those means that not just the port infrastructure, the marine infrastructure, but also the connectivity through to the corridors is important. And Ignacy's itemized and detailed some of the further the importance of some of the further studies that can be undertaken. Indeed, some of the in our observations, some of our early findings were that some obvious routes from end to end, not just port to port, but end to end transportation. Sometimes the obvious route was not the one that was being undertaken due to the economics. So even the shorter distance, it was not the chosen route. So in some instances, there was a longer route that was undertaken with more intermodal changes because it was a cheaper route that was more economical. So we do see that there's value in unbundling that and bearing witness to some of those corridor observations that we found in the scoping study. Leading on to some of the questions that we didn't have time to address, there was a question relating to shipping in the Caspian, and a colleague from ministry in Kazakhstan, Aygul Manizbay, made the question, will the issue of the competition between shipping companies in the Caspian Sea be considered, taking account of the convention signed? This is a very good question, and the short answer is that competition prevails based upon the commercial realities of shipping companies, their owners and shareholders. The differentiation in shipping is that there is few barriers to entry apart from the initial capital cost. The regulatory aspect of deploying a ship is few. The Caspian Sea location presented an interesting scenario because with the dissolution of the USSR, it invalidated a long-standing treaty between Soviet countries and Iran that had a demarcation of rights of passage on the Caspian Sea. So a renewal or a revitalization of some agreement was necessary. It took quite some time for that to be realized. And the 5 countries bordering the Caspian agreed that they would each control the territory of 15 nautical miles from their shores for mineral and energy exploration, and another 10 miles for fishing. And obviously that relates to the the valuable sturgeon fishing. Remaining areas were shared jointly, pending further negotiations. So the agreement, the ratification of the agreement, is still pending further deliberations on some specifics. The interesting application of the Caspian is the definition of whether it is a sea or a lake, an inland lake, because if it's defined, if the country's governments define that the Caspian is a sea, then the United Nations Law of the Sea Act takes precedent, which allows unregulated movement of shipping. However, the agreement is specific to the Caspian, relating to those specific limitations of trade. So since the Caspian is an inland sea, it was decided that it fell under the category of an inland body, which is different to the international standard of the international law for seas. So that distinction, even though academic, is quite an important one. So the other interesting part of to answer the question is relative to the Caspian linking with oceans, and that can be achieved through the Volga-Don Canal through to the Sea of Azov, and then onwards into the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. The implication for that, for transiting through the canal, is that Russia has the status of the transit state, so they have rights of passage over that route. So the short answer being that even though there's a convention signed, still the level of competition would prevail on the Caspian based on the numbers and the capacity and frequency of services operating between port to port. So I trust that answers the question, and I'd welcome other such questions on either port infrastructure, connectivity, shipping services directly within the CAREC country regions, or those associated and linking through those. I now like to pass the floor across to our erstwhile and esteemed colleague Davran, who will launch the survey and act as moderator for the survey from this point. Thank you.
Большое спасибо, Эдриан. Добрый день, добрый вечер, уважаемые коллеги. Согласно нашей повестке дня, мы сейчас должны перейти к проведению опроса. Напоминаю, что наши исследования по портам логистики, проведенная группой экспертов, рассматривается как предварительное. И после его завершения нам необходимо будет рассмотреть дальнейшие возможности его, возможные действия и возможности продления его. Целью опроса является дать программе CARES своего рода ориентиры относительно следующих шагов в области нашего исследования. Как уже сегодня было сказано, на первом вебинаре уже рассматривались два вопроса, и участники могли проголосовать по тем или иным дальнейшим шагам. Результаты двух этих опросов будут внесены в отчетные документы, а также использованы в дальнейшей работе. Я хотел бы напомнить порядок проведения наших дальнейших действий. Сейчас перед вами поочередно будут появляться вопросы и перечень возможных ответов к ним. Вам будет предоставлено по 2-3 минуты на выбор только трех вопросов по каждому, трех ответов по каждому вопросу. И по итогам опроса его результаты также появятся на ваших мониторах. Пожалуйста, я прошу включить первый вопрос и ответы к нему. Большое спасибо за участие. Как мы видим, наиболее актуальными вопросами, еще идет продолжение, наиболее актуальными вопросами остаются это расширение сотрудничества с региональными организациями с участием транзитных стран, не входящих в ЦАРЕС, а также определение возможностей для развития мультимодальных коридоров. С вашего позволения я попрошу перейти ко второму вопросу и также поучаствовать в голосовании. Как видно, предпочтение отдается мультимодальным перевозкам, исследований в этой области. Ну, а также почти на равных идет это способности и навыки в области логистики и цепочки поставок, а также планирование и управление логистическими и распределительными центрами. Большое спасибо. Уважаемые коллеги, переходим к очередному пункту повестки дня. Согласно сценарию мероприятия, мы планируем предоставить слово для выступления по одному представителю от каждой страны-участницы программы ЦАРЕС. Очередность будет обеспечиваться в алфавитном порядке. И с вашего позволения я предложу, что продолжительность выступления будет до 5 минут. По итогам вебинария все предоставленные выступления будут учтены, проанализированы и включены в итоговые документы отчета. Я попрошу кто захочет принимать участие, кто захочет выступить, обязательно нужно будет нажать клавишу «Поднять руку». После этого наши организаторы смогут увидеть выступающего и переключат оборудование на него, микрофон на него. Пожалуйста. Согласно очередности, слово предоставляется представителю Афганистана. Пожалуйста, представители Афганистана. Ну, возможно, мы тогда перейдем к следующему участнику. Перейдем к Азербайджану. Представитель Азербайджана. Может быть, наверное, надо дать время подготовиться нашим уважаемым участникам. В этой связи, может быть, я пока озвучу ответ на один вопрос, который прозвучал от представителя ИРУ, уважаемой Татьяны Рейбеллет. Да. Вопрос касался альтернативных маршрутов транзита. И, значит, практически через все страны ЦАРЭС проходят международные транспортные коридоры, позволяющие осуществлять транзитные операции как минимум по одному маршруту. Разветвленность региональных коммуникаций и пунктов пересечения границы, а также возможность осуществления мультимодальных перевозок позволяют осуществлять транзит собственных грузов по сопредельным территориям, используя разные альтернативные маршруты. Так, Узбекистан при формировании своих внешнеторговых маршрутов применяет принцип многовекторности, позволяющий обеспечить бесперебойные поставки экспортно-импортных грузов в оговоренные сторонами сроки на экономических выгодных условиях. Как следствие, такие факторы, как экономические санкции, введение временных конвенций, природные катаклизмы, прочие форс-мажорные обстоятельства, сдерживающие транспортировку, не влияют на выполнение международных обязательств. Выборочно отмечу отдельные успешные действия представителей стран ЦАРЭС по развитию альтернативных транзитных коридоров. К ним относятся железная дорога Ахалкалаки-Карс, железная дорога Астара, Иран, Астара, Азербайджан, Баку, Ялама на границе с Россией. Железнодорожные ветки Кирки, Назар, это Туркменистан, Акина, Афганистан, и Серхатабад, Тургунди. Прикаспийская железная дорога Казахстан, Туркменистан, Иран. Западный Китай, Западная Европа. Автомагистраль. Железная дорога Халк-Герат. Развитие порта Карачи и внутренних автомагистралей. Транспортный автомобильный маршрут Китай, Узбекистан, Китай, Киргизстан, Узбекистан. Также существуют вопросы, сдерживающие грузопотоки в регионе. Из-за возникающих сложностей с транзитом отдельных грузопотоков, направляемых из стран Ближнего Востока, следует по двум более протяженным альтернативным автомобильным маршрутам. Это Иран, Турция, Азербайджан, далее паром через Каспийское море, далее страны назначения в Центральной Азии. Второй долгий маршрут – это Иран, Турция, далее Азербайджан, Грузия, Россия, далее страны назначения Центральной Азии. Данные маршруты в 2-3 раза протяженнее прямого направления. Так, протяженность маршрута Таджикистан, Туркменистан, Мешхед составляет 1300 километров, а маршрут через Каспийское море около 2500 километров, а через Россию 3,9 тысяч километров. При этом расходы на транспортировку через территорию России по сравнению с прямым маршрутом больше почти на 900 километров, на $900 США. а через паром на $2500. Актуальным является создание альтернативного транспортного коридора Китай, Кыргызстан, Узбекистан. Если автомобильный маршрут уже функционирует в течение нескольких лет, то проект создания нового альтернативного железнодорожного маршрута по транспортировке грузов, прежде всего из Китая, продолжает оставаться в стадии согласования. Ключевыми нерешенными вопросами являются маршрут пролегания, ширина колеи, пункт замены вагонных тележек, условия финансирования, другие технические вопросы. Формирование проекта станет возможным после выработки окончательной позиции Кыргызстана, страны, на территории которой будет реализован этот проект. Также необходимо понять мнение других участников данного проекта, международных организаций, членами которой является Кыргызстан. Возможным также является проведение консультаций в рамках ЦАРЕС по вопросам его реализации и последующего взаимодействия с другими транзитными маршрутами, следующими из КНР. Спасибо. Вот это краткая информация по альтернативным коридорам. Теперь я все-таки хотел бы перейти к нашей дискуссии. Возможно, уже стороны настроились на выступление. И я хотел бы передать слово все-таки афганской стороне, представителю Афганистана.
Abraham,
Да.
can I chip in?
Да.
It looks that we don't have sufficient representation of countries in this meeting because this is basically the discussion. It's not the formal meeting of the TCC style. So my suggestion firstly is that everyone who is willing to suggest certain recommendations or proposals, or would like to comment, or would like to clarify certain points, free to raise hand and join the discussion. So let's not go by country. It will consume too much time. Second, in the first webinar, I was planning in my introduction to mention this, but unfortunately my internet connection failed. We had a very interesting proposal from the CAREC Institute. The representative of the CAREC Institute mentioned that we have the Cpmm monitoring study. And in this monitoring study, we have certain performance metrics which show that cross-border transport takes a lot of time. And certain targets are required for the multimodal corridors leading from the ports to the final destinations inland. His suggestion was that basically we can probably set certain aspirational lead times from the major ports, like from the ports of Karachi to Almaty. And after that, based on those aspirations, think about what can be done, what kind of the bottlenecks can be removed, and what is required to achieve that performance. She mentioned 2-3 days from Karachi to Almaty, which is probably too optimistic, but anyway, I think one of the possible studies which we can do within this ports and logistics pillar could be designing the best to be state of logistics performance along the corridors. But that would of course will require detailed analysis of all bottlenecks and all issues, starting from the ports through the national transport corridors to the borders and until the final destination. But I think this is actually a good start. If we do such studies, we can probably start with 1 or 2 for the beginning, and after that present what is the current transit time and transit cost, and what can be achieved, and what are the conditions for achieving this. That would be a completely new set of activities for the governments, because that will help them see where time is lost. CPMM, unfortunately, cannot give us all answers, because in CPMM we focus on certain border crossing points. So this holistic end-to-end study, and basically some ministries of transport, like I have seen such end-to-end studies done by the Department for Transport of the United Kingdom. So they did such studies in the past to look at certain commodities, how they move from Europe to the United Kingdom, or from the United Kingdom to some other markets where goods are being sold. So I suggest that we can probably investigate this and try to present to the countries a knowledge product, which would show that this is what currently happening, and this is what can happen, and what will be the cost and time implication. That's already one wonderful idea for our consideration. Back to you. Davran, you're muted.
Да, извините. Да. Олег, большое спасибо за предложение и хорошие комментарии. Давайте тогда предоставим слово тем, кто хочет выступить, кто хочет внести какие-то предложения, рекомендации, советы, замечания. Пожалуйста. Напоминаю, что кто хочет выступить, необходимо нажать кнопочку «Поднять руку».
Hello, actually, this is Emre, Sir Operations Team Leader from Islamic Development Bank. Just wanted to update you, actually, that we're getting recently very serious requests and ownership regarding Trans-Afghan Railways. You know, just Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. It's a very key project for countries actually to reach the ports of Pakistan. That discussions has been really intensified for recently, and of course I'm pretty sure that actually you guys also know. I mean, looking for it's a very big project, like 4.55 billion thing, and looking for cooperations. I guess these governments have already reached all these IFIs. So just wanted to update you that and there is a really a big request and really commitment from the governments about carrying out this railway, but it's not a one IFI job, so it requires really a big partnership. And I just wanted to hear from you whether actually you're aware of that, or do you have any plans? I mean, ADB CAREC on site. Thank you so much.
Could I respond? Okay. Yes, ADB has received the same request. Well, actually, we worked with the government of Afghanistan and other governments, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, for the railways development for many years. Currently in Afghanistan, one of our major activities is support of the Afghan Railways Administration in developing their capacity. There are several railway links which come to Afghanistan from the neighborhoods. From Iran, this is a railway which is currently being built to Herat. From Turkmenistan, we have Turgundi, Akin and Khoy railway links. And from Uzbekistan, we have the railway built to Mazar-e-Sharif. These railways are operational. So goods can move to Afghanistan and from Afghanistan, and after that they are transshipped to the trucks and delivered to the final destination. There are certain limitations of the train stations capacities, limitations in rolling stock, data interchange, customs procedures. And currently, this is the #1 priority for the Afghan railways, and ADB is assisting Afghan railways with this. We also discussed with the World Bank and we discussed with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank the plans of Afghanistan in building transit railways. The problem with the transit railways is that demand for such services is very uncertain. The financial viability of these projects is also unknown. The cost of these projects is high and money are not available. So currently what we do, we decided to support the governments with the traffic study for the new railway. It will take some time to prepare the study. So within the CAREC Railway Working Group, there was a study to develop a railway traffic model. So basically it will help determine the demand and possible revenues which can be collected. So we assume that the railway has already been built. We don't look at the construction side. We just look at the commercial side. And based on the findings, we will contribute the same findings to the World Bank team and the country teams for further analysis. But bear in mind that any project of that scale, it requires a very robust feasibility study. And feasibility studies are done by people, and people can be influenced by certain political agendas. So it's very important that this study is done impartially. All aspects are considered before any decisions are done about financing the project. So 5 years to construct this railway probably is too optimistic. We have an example of the railway which has been under discussion for 2 decades. This is the China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan railway. So far, we don't see any end in this discussion. The railway was supposed to be built in the beginning of 2000s. Still, we don't see the railway because feasibility is not there. But anyway, we are on top of this because this is the request from our countries. And the ADB team will provide our best service and best knowledge for the informed decisions, investment decisions.
Well, just to compliment you, actually, yeah, I totally agree with what you said, and it's a very challenging project, and really, I mean, it's not easy to implement. Even before feasibility report, maybe a pre-feasibility report is required. But just on our side, we are also committed to discuss and to provide any kind of support from our side as well. Thanks for the update.
Большое спасибо, господин
Can
Emre.
I add maybe one more thing?
Да.
I think this is a very interesting question also from the standpoint of the logistics. We need to understand competitive advantages and disadvantages of rail vis-a-vis other modes of transport. Primarily, we are talking about road transport. It's well known that railway transport is good for low distance travel, but this is from the books. So, for example, those studies are done in the, for example, United States, and after that they are put in the books of business logistics by the American gurus of logistics. But the similar studies are actually required in other regions. For the railways, we always have the situation that the first mile is very expensive. Fixed cost is very high. Before you move the rail car and load the rail car, you already probably spend $500, even without shipping anything. But after that, the linear tariff is competitive vis-a-vis road transport. But it also depends very much on the loading factor. If you load a wagon with 60 tons of goods or even 80 tons of goods, that may be liquid bulk cargo, then your cost break-even point may be achieved at 300 kilometers vis-a-vis road transport. But if your loading factor is small, if you load a 40-feet container and put it on the feeding platform, but in the 40-feet container you put just 15 tons of cargo, then it may appear that after 2,000 kilometers, rail is still less competitive in terms of the cost than road transport. And don't forget, road transport is door-to-door. Railways, you have to have first mile and the last mile on the road. So, and further to this, also please take into account the terrains. Of course, terrains will impact road transport significantly, but they impact rail transport even more significantly. So if you haul a short train of 20 wagons by 2-3 locomotives, because otherwise you will not be able to race to bring the cargo to the mountain range, and after that get down to the valley, then the cost break even may be 3,000 kilometers, 4,000 kilometers. So it's very important that here we do all the necessary analysis comparing with the road transport. Also in road transport, not all opportunities for optimization of road transport have been achieved. If you look at the transit from Karachi to, let's talk Bishkek. Karachi to Bishkek is, if I'm not mistaken, that would be 3.5 thousand kilometers by road. It takes much more time to deliver goods from Karachi to Bishkek than it would be possible if there would be no barriers for movement of road transport. So we need to look at the bilateral agreements. The bilateral agreements for the road transport, they don't exist between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, between Afghanistan and Tajikistan. The same no road transport agreement between Pakistan and Central Asian republics. And even the old existing agreement between Pakistan and Afghanistan after agreement has expired and not renewed. So there is a lot of opportunities actually to improve road transport before we will say road transport is inferior in terms of the logistics cost and time vis-a-vis rail. So all these factors need to be taken into consideration. And finally, don't forget that a lot of people are employed in road transport haulage. There are a lot of companies who compete with each other and a lot of companies who employ a lot of people. How about this? If we build the railway, what will happen with these firms and these people?
Большое спасибо, уважаемый господин Эмре СР, за поднятый вопрос и, конечно же, Олег за прекрасный комментарий и подробную информацию по теме. Пожалуйста, кто еще хочет выступить и поделиться своими мыслями по данной теме? Или по другой? Судя по всему, больше нет желающих.
It seems there are a few questions on the question and answer box. Unfortunately, they are in Russian and I cannot understand them. Could you have a look at it?
Игнатий, насколько я понимаю, здесь нет вопросов, здесь просто идет обсуждение технических возможностей. Это не вопросы.
Добран, I see a question, Q&A from
Да, где
Asel
он?
Rasulov. She says that she cannot speak, so maybe you need
Да.
to remind that first they need to raise hand or just unmute this participant because she's already willing to talk.
Hello, sorry. Do you hear me? It's Bakhtiar Faziev speaking from EBRD.
Yes,
Да,
Bakhtiar.
Yeah, thanks a lot for giving floor to me. Actually, my question was about this, again, development of the transit corridors and railway transit corridors in particular in our regions of operations, let's say Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan. Are you aware of any priority investment projects that would be of interest actually for IFIs and national governments that we might focus on in the near future and then just try to cooperate on that field? Thank you.
Позвольте мне высказаться по поводу железнодорожных маршрутов. В частности, Кыргызстан, я уже упоминал сейчас в своем выступлении, кратком ответе, что там действительно существует проект, которому уже больше 25 лет, насколько я знаю. И этот проект по созданию железнодорожного маршрута из Китая через Кыргызстан в Узбекистан. Неоднократно принимались всеправительственные решения в рамках данного проекта, понималась необходимость создания этого коридора. Тем не менее, до настоящего времени вопрос этот не решался. Стороны на трехсторонней основе формировали так называемые рабочие группы. Уже, насколько я знаю, прошло 3 заседания этой группы, и тем не менее вопросы всегда оставались на том же месте, практически на том же месте, когда, в общем-то, решался вопрос, где, по какому маршруту будет проходить эта колея, эта железная дорога. Киргизская сторона предлагала поднимать от Торугарда, если я правильно помню, вверх, где-то на 160 километров вверх эту железную дорогу на север тянуть, и там уже где-то, место я уже сейчас не могу вспомнить, проводить замену тележек или перегруз с китайских железнодорожных вагонов на так называемый советский, колея 15-20. Но, тем не менее, в общем-то, предлагались другие альтернативные маршруты. Один южный в направлении Таджикистана, туда вниз. И также посередине тоже вопрос поднимался, через центр Кыргызстана тоже поднимать эту железную дорогу вверх. Тем не менее, в общем-то, проводились исследования и китайской стороной, где они наглядно показывали, были такие моменты, когда, в общем-то, из-за сложных погодных, природных условий в зимний период, из-за горной местности эти вопросы, они решались, очень сложно было решить вопрос о направлении этого маршрута по данному маршруту. Поэтому, в общем-то, вопрос, он до сих пор остается открытым. Не знаю даже.
Спасибо.
Пока вот так, все, пожалуйста.
Can I also respond? Firstly, Bakhtiar, thank you for your question. we need to be clear about the terms of reference of our consultants. Their role is to assess the situation and after that provide recommendations. But the political decisions are obviously done by the countries and financial decisions are done by the financial institutions. Here, regarding the mega projects, railway mega projects, which are multi-billion dollar projects, we know about these projects. We work with all developing partners, primarily World Bank, AIB, EBRD, of course. So far, if we look at the current observations within the CAREC program and the findings of our consultants here, we see that many infrastructure links are already there. Even if we talk about the ports, if we talk about the Caspian seaports, they are in pretty good shape. But operational capacities are not yet there because of the coordination issues, information exchange issues, and many other issues of the logistics nature. Even when we talk about the railway projects, there is a lot of opportunity actually to improve road transport. A lot of roads being built, and opportunities exist to travel along the corridors at the speed of 400 kilometers per day. But you will hardly see any road freight vehicles which would be able to travel at this speed because of a lot of hurdles at the border crossing points and between the border crossing points. Also, many countries still require transshipment. If you travel from South Asian region, if you come from Karachi, you will have to transship 2 times if you travel to Tashkent. Firstly, at the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and second, at the border between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. Each transshipment takes time. Each transshipment is expensive. During each transshipment, you have an opportunity to damage cargo, and some cargo can be stolen. So there is a lot of opportunities actually to improve road transport before we will start talking about building new railways.
Yeah, thank you, Oleg. Yeah, my idea was even not about new links and new roads, but maybe some rehabilitation and reconstruction, maybe improvement of logistics capacities of the countries of operations. Yes, thanks a lot. It's noted. We'll continue monitoring that and try to find something not so big, not large scale, but something effective and that can trigger further development of the sector.
I would like to add regarding railways the importance to look at the first and last miles, because we identified that there are some gaps, bottlenecks there that sometimes are not well identified and well understood. Just a few examples regarding ports. For instance, in the case of Poti, there is no direct rail access to the container terminals, so that there is the need to transship to shuttle containers from the dock side to a terminal, to a rail terminal that is somewhere between 2 or 3 kilometers away, which adds cost. Take Batumi. Batumi has a railway connection to the terminal, but the length of the railway terminal is quite short. Let's take Karachi. Karachi ports have many constraints, some gaps, and in fact only 1 in the 3 container terminals in Karachi have, let's say, acceptable rail access. but the other two do not have good rail connections or not at all. Seaport has rail connection. Let's see also at the end of it, when we look at rail terminals in some main cities in Central Asia, what we find is that most terminals have loading areas shorter than 500 meters. That means that a long train, let's say about 700, 800 meters, need to be cut into two. Complex shunting operations are adding costs. We see some container terminals and rail cargo terminals located inside the city, so there is complexities in moving trucks in and out, etc. So infrastructure, we can think about long corridors, ambitious schemes, but we also need to look at the detailed gaps that are happening at both ends, at port, basically, and also, well, in principle in container terminals, and also at destination at railway container terminals and and dry ports in the hinterlands.
Thank you.
Спасибо, Игнасий. Дополнительно, кто еще хочет выступить, прошу. Больше желающих нет. Олег, может быть, мы уже перейдем к сессии номер 3, Final Remarks. Как вы считаете?
Devon, I'm fine with this. So the final remarks are on me. Is it correct? Okay. So dear participants, dear country delegates, and respectful development partners. Just a moment, I'm receiving a message. It looks that we still have someone who's willing to talk. No, we don't. Okay, in that case, let me wrap up our two-part webinar. Firstly, many thanks to our consultants who prepared such a wonderful and big report. Actually, it's a 3-volume report. The first volume is the comprehensive overview of the ports and logistics issues with recommendations. The second report is a very good knowledge product for those people who would like to know more about the ports and the specific concerns and the specific bottlenecks and development plans. And those are the ports many are not in the CAREC region. Many of them are well outside of the CAREC region. And this is probably one of the first documents in transport, which is talking about CAREC, but it's not confined by the CAREC borders. It basically shows that the transport corridors within the CAREC, they are starting somewhere else. They terminate at the ports or between the ports and the CAREC member countries. And we need to understand the whole complexity of logistics from the point of production of goods or sale of goods until the point of consumption of goods. Because that basically makes our industries competitive. And here we will continue our work by looking at those recommendations which have been prepared by the consultants. There is a wonderful menu which includes quite a lot of suggestions. We will today we tried actually to receive some of your guidance in terms of which of those aspects need to be addressed first. And it looks to me that we have some ideas, and those ideas will be implemented in the near future. So currently we are preparing some additional terms of reference for some additional work. There will be some spin-off studies from this ports and logistics scoping study. So it will become a fully fledged pillar within the CAREC transport strategy. And we hope that working together, we will be able to remove some of the bottlenecks. As it was heard today, most of the bottlenecks are not of the transcontinental nature. They are small, sometimes very small issues of the data interchange, sometimes very small issues of interchange of between modes of transport at the final destination, or maybe at the ports, are big issues. Those are not multi-billion-dollar investments, but those are things which may require some management, some procedural improvements, and some legal improvements. And return on investment for such activities can be very, very huge. Even those activities may be not very expensive, may not even require support from the development partners such as ADB, World Bank, or even EBRD. And they have a lot of opportunities, and private sector has a lot of opportunities actually to support the national governments in resolving those bottlenecks. So we're looking forward for more work in this sector. And we hope that within this year, we will prepare some additional knowledge products, which we will be able to share with you. And hopefully we will have more discussions in 2021. And really, we're looking forward that those discussions will be not through the screens, but eventually face-to-face with some maybe study tours to some wonderful logistics facilities and ports here and there. Again, thank you very much, and I wish you all the best in your work. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Oleg.
Thank you very much.
Yep. So, a good webinar. Thank you for hosting. Ignacy, Devran. Thank you, Pilar. Thank you, Marianne.
Many thanks to our translators. It's very important in that kind of webinars to do very good simultaneous translation.